So I'll just begin by introducing the York International team. First, we have Eugene Lee, who is the International Student Experience Coordinator that oversees the orientation and transition portfolio. As I mentioned before, I'm Anika, and here are also my other colleagues, Tirth and Sarah, who are student coordinators. So by the end of this webinar, it is our hope that students will have more knowledge on what to expect when arriving at the border, important documents that you should bring and present to the Canadian Customs, as well as some questions that you might be asked by the Canadian Custom officers. In terms of the structure for today's webinar, we'll first have a presentation by the International Student Advisors and Immigration Specialists. We'll talk a little bit about arriving in Canada, paying some of your fees with CIBC. We'll have our Q&A session, and then we'll talk a little bit about our upcoming pre-arrival webinars and events. So just to remind you again, you're free to ask all your questions using the Q&A feature during the entire webinar. Now I'll go ahead and hand over to Gilbert, who is our International Student Advisor and one of our immigration specialists here.
All right, thank you, Anika. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us. We're super excited to have you join us in this webinar today. And also, we're going to spend the next few minutes also talking about how to better prepare yourself for your arrival in Canada. So my name is Gilbert Otime, and I'm currently one of the International Student and Immigration Specialists at York International. I am a licensed regulated Canadian immigration consultant, and this is a designation for persons who are licensed to give immigration advice in Canada. And at York International, we have advisors here that have different designations. For example, as you can see in one of my colleagues, Mayuri, she's a lawyer, and the rest of us are regulated Canadian immigration consultants. So all of us are licensed to give immigration advice on a variety of issues such as study permit, temporary residence visas, working on campus, co-op work permit, postgraduate work permit, and permanent residence, right? So just some important reminders that you need to keep in mind is that only a licensed person can or should give immigration advice. So why is this important? Because immigration law can be very complex and each person's situation is unique. So we always want to be seeking advice or information from authorized sources, so such as an immigration lawyer or immigration consultant, or going to RICC's main webpage. I know some of you know friends, families who have gone through the immigration system or process before, and they're eager to share their experiences or opinion or personal experiences with you. That is fine, but just be careful about the information that is being shared and how that information is being obtained. And always check the legal sources first before you proceed. Okay. All right, so in terms of what we do here, I mentioned briefly that, we cannot act as legal representative for students, but we're here to help you and provide guidance and information, right? So we help with study permit, temporary residence visas, working on or off campus, co-op work permit, PGWP, and permanent residence too as well. We do have an event calendar that has our webinar sessions, which are all free for all students to attend. They'll put a link in the chat for you, and I'll encourage you to bookmark that page as well. We also do deliver regular presentation, focused webinars on topics like pathways to permanent residence in Canada. And also, we want to make sure that immigration-related matters are very easy for you to understand and also to deal with, so that you can focus on what is more important, obtaining a high-quality education in Canada. Right. So as a York University student, you do have access to in-person, one-on-one advising via book appointment, for topics that requires time to discuss. So mostly complicated issues. And this is typically on Mondays and Wednesdays from 1 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. and an appointment is needed. We are also located at 200 your claims during advising hours. We also have virtual drop-in. No appointment is needed for the virtual drop-in, but this is usually for quick related inquiries or questions. During the virtual drop-in, you can ask a whole range of questions, from your study permit to your work authorization in Canada, questions on how to extend your stay beyond your studies. And this is typically on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We also have our immigration workroom, which is every Friday from 1 p.m. and this is in person. This session is sort of an opportunity for you to work on any type of immigration application in real time with support from our international student advisors. So if you have any questions along the way, please, when you come to this immigration workroom, you're required to bring your laptop or any application materials with you. And these resources will sort of help you as and navigate through the process together. All right. And the last thing is our email address. Once you've checked our website, once you've attended any of our immigration webinars and you still haven't, received your answers or there's any follow-ups, you're welcome to send us an email at iadvisor@yorku.ca. All right, so the resources have already been shared in the chat, so you should already have that too as well. So I'll just move on to the next page too as well. But one thing I also wanted to mention was the immigration application resource. So this is important resources on our website. We have webinars there and Q&As there to sort of help you navigate if you haven't already applied for your study permit or your co-op work permit or your PGWP. All right, so let's talk about some important concepts, right? So I'll take you through some important documents and hopefully you should have received this at this point. So a letter of introduction or a port of entry letter. So this is a document sent by the visa office to confirm approval of either your study permit or your work permit, right? So that is what a letter of introduction is called, right? And once you arrive in Canada, you have to present this letter at a point of entry. You should have also received a temporary residence visa or a TRV. Some people refer to them as V1 or S1 visa. They're all the same thing. So this authorizes your entry into Canada. So if you are from a visa required country, you are going to need a TRV to enter Canada. Applicants from a non-visa requiring country would receive an electronic travel authorization, ETA for short, approval. This is automatically linked to your passport. You will typically find the ETA number and validity in your letter of introduction too as well. And this allows you multiple entry during your validity period. So just make sure you double check that before you get on that flight and come to Canada. Right. So based on the examination at the point of entry, you're then going to be issued a study permit, which allows you to study in Canada. So there are two things I already mentioned, right? There is a TRV or an ETA, which allows you entry into Canada. Once you get into Canada and you meet with a CBSA officer, they're going to issue you a study permit, and that study permit authorizes you to engage in studies once you're in the country, right? So it's also important that, you hold off on booking a flight ticket before you travel to Canada if you haven't received the TRV or the letter of introduction. Processing time for applications sometimes are fast, sometimes are slow, depending on the region or country in which you're applying from. So please make sure you wait for that process to be concluded before you book your tickets. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the documents to carry with you, all right? So make sure you have the following documents available. Do not place them in your checked luggages because when you're going through Canadian customs, you will not have access to your checked luggage, right? It's after you pass the Canadian customs before you can pick up your luggage. So there's certain important documents you need to make sure you have them on you, right? So your passport, your letter of introduction, aka port of entry letter, your temporary residence visa, which is your TLV or electronic travel authorization, ETA, that should be linked to your passport. And also, it's also important to have your York University offer of acceptance letter or proof of enrollment, especially if you haven't begun your studies remotely, your program yet or remotely. And also, your letter of acceptance can be downloaded under your admission tab. So if you go to My File, it's going to be called, acceptance letter or visa letter. You can download it under My File too as well. And your proof of enrollment can also be downloaded there as well. And I think all those links should be shared with you in the chat as well. All right. Okay. Now, you have to also prove that you have enough money to support yourself during your stay, right? And I'm going to go through some documents that you already submitted to support your original application when you applied for your study permit. So in some cases, when there's longer processing time, ICC can ask you for updated financial documents because the ones you submitted were a little bit updated. So when you're traveling, it's always important to have updated financial statement from your bank. Make sure it's clear, it's legible, it's printed out on on a bank statement or on a letterhead from your bank. If you have a GIC, make sure you have a letter indicating that too as well. If you also have scholarships, let us have a printed copy of that too as well. And also if you've paid for your tuition, you can download and print your account statement online too as well. All right. Also, one thing to keep in mind is that, there are certain medicals medical is only valid for 1 year. Some of you might be required to have one based depending on the country in which you're coming from. So make sure you carry proof of that. And it's usually called an e-medical form or tracking sheet. And when you have done a medical result, the actual result is sent to RICC and you're given an e-medical form or a tracking sheet. So make sure you have a copy of that on you as well. All right. So also addresses, where you're going to be staying and phone numbers, So if you're going to be staying on York University campus, you already know what the address is. Make sure you have a copy of that because there's a form you have to fill when you're on a plane before you disembark to indicate where the address you'll be staying at. CBSA would ask you for that too as well. If you are living off campus, make sure you have that because the custom declaration form is going to have that information too. If you have the contact person of someone picking you up, please make sure you have their phone number just in case, the examination takes longer than expected, right? And we'll talk about that too in a few seconds here too as well. And also, there are other documents that are optional, but also good to have, right? So travel and health insurance to cover your trip to Canada, that's optional. Medical immunization record, that's also optional too as well. And also having some cash with you in Canadian dollars is optional, but a good thing and to have, right? So I just add a couple of reminders here. It's always good to have this document in both paper and digital format as well, right? So having them on paper would allow you to have them readily available. We know a lot of you like to have this document on your cell phone, but guess what? Anything could happen, right? You could run out of battery. There might be some connection issues in terms of internet. So having both options would sort of have you covered. And just make sure you have access to your Passport York or My File, especially for new incoming students. These are the two most important websites in case anything is missing. You'll be able to log in into your faculty program or studies, etc. And those are pretty much, the most important critical factors that you need to have. All right. Okay. So moving on, how to plan your luggage, right? Know your luggage allowance, right? If it's 20 kg or 50 kg, make sure you know what that weight allowance is. There are some items that are not allowed into into Canada in your luggage, right? These are restricted restrictions. So, for example, alcohol, tobacco, guns, and certain kinds of food, as well as animal or plant products. No, travelers cannot bring this into the country. So make sure you check the links for that too as well. And also, travelers cannot bring in certain prescription drugs that aren't allowed or approved in Canada. So make sure you check the link for that too as well. All right. So one important thing you need to also keep in mind is do not carry another person's bag or luggage in your stuff. Okay, if someone asks you to bring something to Canada to give to another person that you don't know, don't do it. All right. Just be vigilant on things like that too as well. You're not allowed to have certain liquid past a certain amount in your hand luggage. So you have to check that into your personal carry-on, main luggage. So if you have less than 100 ml in your carry-on, that's perfectly fine. So make sure you keep that in mind too as well. Always attach, a tag to your piece of luggage to identify who it belongs to, name, address of your destination. So in case anything is wrong, it's quickly visible and it can be addressed to that way. Also, keep all important documents, medication, expensive items such as your camera, jewelries, laptop, phones, credit cards, cash in your carry-on bag rather than packing your check bags. Okay, all right. Okay. So as I mentioned, do not finalize your travel until you've received your letter of introduction on your temporary residence visa or your ETA. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between IRCC, and I'll give you the acronyms. I'll spell it out for you too as well, and CBSA. All right. So Canada immigration has two branches. We have IRCC, which stands for Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada. So they are responsible for developing immigration and refugee policies, processing of permanent or temporary residence application, or issuance of visas or permits. So when you've submitted an application to IRCC, it's an IRCC officer that reviews that applications and renders a decision on that application, right? So on the other hand, there's also a second part. When you arrive in Canada, you're going to be meeting with the CBSA officer. So CBSA stands for Canada Border Services Agency. So they're responsible for carrying out enforcement functions, conducting entry examination, conducting investigations, or those believed to be inadmissible to the country. So they also prepare cases for presentation at the Immigration and Refugee Board, IRB, or detaining or removing individuals from Canada if they don't meet the entry requirement, right? So the CBSA officer will make the final decision about whether or not you qualify to enter Canada. All right, so that's just the two definition of those two acronyms. All right, so what to expect when you arrive in Canada, right? So there might be peak seasons depending on the time in which you travel. You may experience longer border processing timeline depending on how many flights come and land at the same time. So just keep that in mind. So during that time, you have to complete all the paperwork too as well. And also, all passengers have to complete an entry examination at a custom before proceeding to the baggage claim area, right? So we'll talk about this. So please make sure you have those important documents with you, the stuff that I talked about, having your passport, your LOA, your medicals. Make sure you have them with you and not in your checked luggages because they're going to be double checking that too as well. All right, so the Border Service Officer, BSO for short, will direct you as to where you need to go to complete your study permit application. So depending on the airport in which you arrive, some airports have special processing areas for international students arriving in Canada. So please watch for the signage that would direct you to those designated areas. So there'll be signs around the airport where international students need to go for separate processing. So pay attention to that too as well. And also an entry examination, at the entry examination, you're going to be asked basic questions about one, your identity, your citizenship, your residency, your purpose of entry. So why are you coming into Canada? I'm coming here to study. Your length of stay. My program is 2 years. My program is 4 years, right? You're also going to be asked in-depth questions about your eligibility and admissibility. So keep that in mind as well, okay? Once all of that is done, a study permit will be issued at the conclusion of your entry examination, right? So let's talk about entry examination and what that looks like, right? So they have primary examination. So we talked about basic questions, and we also talked about going to talk about in-depth questions. So what could those two look like, right? So there are things that you should expect or at least know about your identity, right? So what's your name? You should know your name, right? Your citizenship, what's your citizenship, right? If you're coming from a country of residence that is not your citizenship, you have to indicate that too as well. Your residency, where do you reside, right? Your intention, what's the purpose of your trip to Canada, right? Your length of stay, how long do you intend to stay in Canada? Employment, do you intend to seek employment whilst in Canada? You also have to keep in mind that eligible international students are allowed to work on campus and off campus. So there's restriction on how many hours you can work off campus, and starting in September, it's going to move to 24 hours. Right now, it's 20 hours a week off campus. And also on campus, if you get a job, there's no restriction on how many hours you can work to as well. So just keep that in mind. Or if you are participating in a co-op internship while studying at a DLI institution, for example, York, right? So at York, we don't have a co-op program in the first year, right? So typically your co-op program will start in the second year. So you shouldn't be doing any work internship in that case, right? You cannot work before your program has actually begun. So for example, if I arrived, let's say I'm coming from, let's say Ghana, for example, and arrived 2 or 3 days early, right? My program would start September 4th, and I came, let's say August 30th, right? I cannot start working until I have begun my studies. That's really important. So keep that in mind too as well. So let's talk about secondary examination. So what does that look like, right? So international students entering for the first time are automatically referred for secondary examination. It's a must, it's gonna happen, right? So officers at the secondary examination are gonna ask more in-depth questions that are not really part of the primary examination to determine your eligibility, right? So officers will make an assessment of your admissibility to Canada on medical, criminal, or security grounds. They're going to verify all the documentation that you submitted for your initial study permit application. So just make sure you all have all of that with you too as well, right? And then on conclusion, that is when, they'll make a decision, and then your study permit will be issued to you once the conclusion of the secondary examination is done. All right. So this is also important, tips on interaction with CBSA, so Canada Border Services Agents, right? So a couple of tips here, right? It's important, and always in your best interest to answer questions truthfully, right? There's something called misrepresentation, and it's a serious immigration offense up to a 5-year ban in Canada, right? So that it could be giving false information or omitting certain information that could be a serious immigration offense or could be subject to serious fines. I'm not saying this to scare you or anything like that. All I'm trying to say is that we want you to be familiarized with your own application. If someone did your application for you, you used an agent or a family member to do your application. Before you travel, it is a good time to get a copy of your application so you can sort of familiarize yourself with the information that is on there, right? So the officers, can see your file, they see your file in front of them, they expect you to know what is on your application, right? So for example, what's your program of study? And on paper, it's Bachelor of Science, but you don't know that. You should know what program you apply to. You should know the expected duration of your program, right? Is it 2 years? Is it 1 year? Is it 4 years? You should know at least those basic information, right? Also, how much is your tuition for at least a semester, or how much is your tuition for a year? So things like that, right? So only answer the questions you've been asked at that point, right? Some people tend to go on, I know whenever I go to the border, I get a little bit nervous, I tend to, talk too much, and that's okay too, right? But just remember that these officers are very busy. They're going through a lot of passengers every day. You want to keep your answers straight to the point, and concise, right? So for example, right, if you do not know the answer or you're unsure, right, the best thing to say is, I think, or I'm not sure. So the officer knows that you're trying to give your best educated guess, right? If you do not understand the question or you didn't hear the question properly, you can ask the officer to repeat or rephrase the question, right? Some of us, let's say English is not your first language, that's perfectly fine. If you speak French, that's okay too. You can request the language in which that you want to speak into as well. Some of you are also tired after a long flight, jet lag, things like that. You need a minute or two to sort of adjust. That's okay, right? So just make sure you make it clear to the officer, look, I did not understand your question. Can you repeat that? Can you rephrase that question? I really didn't understand what you just said. Have those documents that we talked about readily accessible to help streamline your examination. All right, so have them ready. You're gonna, once you disembark from the airplane, you're gonna be walking. Once you get there, there's gonna be a lineup. That's your opportunity to get all your documents out, already arranged, hopefully. If it's not, take that minutes to arrange so that that process goes smoothly for you too as well. Always be respectful and cordial. All right. This is the last general tip that I would give you, right? Some officers might find, might be, let me say, friendly. Some might be strict. Some, might not be having a good day. You don't know which officer you're going to get, right? So just be respectful and polite. They are just trying to get their job done. They're just trying to facilitate and get the process going for you. So just keep that in mind, all right? Okay, let's talk about things to check on your study permit. And this is a number of mistakes that I've seen, and I want you to pay attention here, right? So we'll talk about this too as well. All right, so, all right, let me just load that information. All right, so finally, if you've answered everything correctly, the officer would issue you your study permit. Before you leave the airport, there are a few things that you need to check, okay? Right. This is absolutely very key, and I can re-emphasize and emphasize all over again. So, but I want you to keep your eyes on these things, because remember, the CBS officers are also human beings. We all make mistakes, all right? So on top of your section of your study permit, it contains your personal details, right? Including your name, your date of birth, your country of birth, your country of citizenship, and your passport number. Okay? So it's possible for ICC officers to make mistakes, and they are not perfect, right? So you have to ensure that the information on there is correct, right? So when they give you your study permit, take a few seconds or a minute, right? Review your name, see how it's spelled. Review your passport number, see if the number is correct, see if the citizenship that they put in there is correct, right? You just want to make sure that this information is correct and you catch those mistakes before you leave the airport, right? If you find that, they've made a mistake on your name, you let the officer know right away, because once you've left the airport, it's too late. You would have to do an amendment of your study permit, which is going to take time and which is also going to cost you money too as well, because we know immigration, there's nothing free in immigration. So anything, you have to pay for it. All right. The second thing is the duration of your study permit. So there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to an officer issuing you, your program is, let's say, 4 years, and you've been issued a 1-year validity of your study permit. You just need to verify why you only got 1 year, or sometimes the CBS officers will tell you, right? So usually study permits are usually valid until the end of your program plus 90 days. So the officer will add 90 days to it, or unless the passport is expiring before your studies is concluded. So CBSA or immigration officers have the discretion to determine the length of your authorized stay in Canada, right? So at the bottom of your study permit, right? So on the sample that you see on your screen there, at the very bottom there, you're gonna see conditions listed on the document that allows you to either work, work authorization, and if you're eligible, it's gonna be listed there that you're authorized to work. You're authorized to, engage in certain activities. You can work, you can study. They'll list those specific conditions there, and especially when you need to leave Canada by, right? So make sure you keep that in mind before you leave that airport. Okay? All right. So let's talk about some methods or some tools that you need to keep in mind. Let me just check here a second. Yeah. Before we get in there too as well. Now, before I get to this page, another thing I want you to keep in mind is the expiration date of your study permit, right? Some people may be issued 1 year, right? And then you have to renew it in Canada. So you have to have a system that works for you, right? So for example, I use my calendar, my Gmail calendar, to track, setting important expiration dates, right? So my driver's license, when is it going to expire? When does my passport expires? Have a system that works for you. So for example, some people like to use their parents to remind them. That's perfectly fine. Your mom and dad can be your reminder. Some people have agendas that they use. Some people have stickers that they put on fridges. Some people like to tattoo that expiration date on their arm. Don't do that. That was a joke. So to have a system that works for you, right? So your study permit expiration date, your visa expiration date, your passport expiration date, your ETA. ETAs are usually valid for 5 years, right? And also we recommend that, if your study permit is expiring within with less than 3 months, you should start preparing your document 3 months ahead, right? So renew your study permit before it expires, and this would ensure that you have maintained status whilst you wait for a decision to be rendered on the application. You can continue studying, you can continue working in this case, and if you wait for your study permit to expire, you have 90 days to restore your status. But what that means is that you cannot work, you cannot study until your new study permit has arrived. All right. So let's move to the next slide, where we'll talk about maintaining full-time status at York University. So now you have your study permit. Everything is good to go, right? You are now in Canada, you are an international student. It's important to maintain full-time status if you wish to work on or off campus whilst you study, right? And also, if you plan on ever applying for postgraduate work permit, so a PGWP, so postgraduate work permit, PGWP for short, it's an open work permit that allows international students to remain and work in Canada after completing their studies. So the work experience you obtain throughout your PGWP would help you support your application for permanent residence in Canada. Okay, and this is not something for you to focus on, but we'll come back to that later on too, right? So whilst it's possible for you to be part-time, and be compliant with your study permit conditions, you always want to speak to us. So speak to an international student advisor before you drop to part-time status. So you can make sort of an informed decision as to whether this is best for you or not, right? If you're not sure, come speak to someone, right? To be considered full-time, you must be enrolled in a minimum of 9 credits every fall and 9 credits every winter. So we sometimes have year-long courses, right? So year-long courses can sometimes be 6 credits or 9 credits, depending on what course that you are registered in. So if you're registered in a year-long course, which is from September to April, those year-long courses can be divided into 2 and calculated based on credit per term. I know it's confusing, but eventually you're going to get used to it, right? So last year, we did a quiz. I don't know if we did it this time. I'm not sure. So, but I'll just go through the scenarios, and I'll just go to the questions here. So what scenario is considered full-time, right? So scenario A, I have 6 credits in the fall and 12 credits in the winter. Scenario B, and I'll give you the answers too as well. And scenario B, I have 9 credits. I have nine year credits, 6 for the fall and 3 winter credits, right? And then scenario C, I have 9 credits. Okay. I have 9 credits for the fall and 9 credits for the winter and 3 summer credits, right? So based on scenario A and based on scenario B and based on scenario C, what do you think the correct answer is to be considered full-time status? I'll see if we have a second to launch a poll just to see either scenario A, scenario B, or scenario C. I'll give it a second here to see if we can launch the poll, and then just give me what you think the correct answer is. So I'll go over the scenario again. Scenario A, I have 6 credits in the fall and 12 credits in the winter. Am I considered full-time? And then scenario B, I have 9 credits. I have 9 year credits, 6 for the fall credits and 3 winter credits. Am I considered full-time? Or scenario C, I have 9 fall credits, I have 9 winter credits, and I have 3 summer credits. So if we can launch the poll, please. Perfect. So you can either choose scenario A, scenario B, or scenario C. Let's see what our percentage looks like. Okay, that's trickling in. Okay. All right. Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds here. Okay, we have 21 folks, 23 that have answered the question. Okay. All right, so I guess people are still thinking about which scenario is the best answer here. So we have about 69% that have, submitted it. Anyways, thank you for those who participated. So I'll go through the answers. So the correct answer is scenario C, and about 76% of you got it right. So as you can see, for scenario A, students who are part-time in the fall and part-time in the winter, right? So the students are part-time in the fall and also part-time and full-time in the winter. So that means, for scenario A, it's incorrect. You're not a full-time student. For scenario B, the student is registered in 6 credits in the fall, which is part-time, and 6 credits in the winter, which is also part-time. So that's incorrect. So now scenario C, the student is registered 9 credits in the fall, which is full-time, and 9 credits in the winter, which is also full-time. Summer is optional and not counted. That was just there to throw you off. When you talk about academic breaks, an academic break is a period that is common to all students in a program, whether it's required or not. So it's not compulsory for you to take a scheduled break. So for example, when we have winter closure or summer, for most undergraduate programs or reading week, you're allowed to take a scheduled break for the 4 months or 150 days. For School of Continuing Study students, your breaks are between courses in your program, not an academic break. So you always want to check that. And also graduate students, in case you're here, or PhD students, academic breaks are defined by your faculty. So please don't listen to what I just said, right? So you always want to check with your faculty as well. So during an academic break, if you're enrolled part-time, full-time or not, it wouldn't impact your eligibility for PGWP or your study permit because it's a scheduled break. You're allowed to work, you're allowed to study. You can take part-time courses and you can work full-time, only during scheduled breaks. And again, when you come to our future orientation, we'll talk a lot more about that. So I'll move on to the next one. All right, so working on or off campus, right? So those of you who might be interested in working, this is what you need to know. So if your study permit has the condition that allows you to work, you can go to Service Canada and apply for a social insurance number, either in person or online. It's a 9-digit number that you have to give to your employer. So your employer knows that you're allowed to work in addition to your work permit, or some people, their work permit is tied to the study permit, so you don't have an additional work permit. So this is not an immigration document when we talk about social insurance number, but it's for payroll and taxation purposes, right? Also, to be able to work, you have to be full-time to work. All right. So we have 2 different types of places that you can work. So on campus, you have to have a valid study permit. You have to have a valid social insurance number. Your study permit has to allow those conditions. You have to be full-time in each semester, except final semester, where you can be part-time or scheduled breaks. There's no limit to how many hours you can get on campus. So if you work on campus, you can work 40, 50 hours. There's no limit, okay? Your work authorization ends once you've completed your program. So once you received your final grade, regardless of the expiration date of your study permit, you need to stop working, all right? And also, York International is going to be holding a SIN clinic. We'll talk about that too as well. I think we'll give you the date for that. So the SIN is social insurance number, in case I keep using the term SIN, okay? So we'll show you how to apply for those or where to apply for those too as well, so don't worry. All right, so off-campus employment, is the same. It's the same. The only difference is that you have to, be enrolled in a post-secondary program that is at least 6 months long and leads to a degree or diploma or certificate. You are not authorized to work more than 20 hours a week during a regular academic semester, right? So you may work full-time during an academic break, reading week, winter closures, but you have to be full-time before or after the break. So just keep that in mind too as well. All right. So let's talk briefly about postgraduate work permits. This may be way down the road, but just so you're aware, a PGWP is an open work permit that allows international students to remain and work in Canada after completing their studies. So The work experience that you gain through your PGWP may help support the application for permanent residence in Canada. So to be eligible, you have to have completed your program of study. You have to be in a program that is more than 6 months and leading to a degree, diploma, or certificate. And also you have to maintain full-time status during each academic term, right? So you would have 90 days to apply for your PGWP whilst you're in Canada, or 180 days once you've received your final grade as well. All right. So that's all I have for you for now. Thank you for giving me your undivided attention. And then I'll pass it on to my colleague, Anika, to take it on. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Gilbert, for all the information that you shared. At a lot of our events, we have tons of immigration questions, and we always encourage students to attend one of these sessions just so that you're getting your questions answered by an immigration specialist. So we have tons of questions in the chat already. In the Q&A, I just want to, again, urge everyone, ask all your questions now so that Gilbert may be able to answer them. Thank you again, Gilbert. So now I'm going to hand over to the CIBC team to talk to us a little bit about how you can pay your tuition through the CIBC portal.
Thank you so much, Gilbert and Anika. It's been a great presentation so far. And hello to all the students. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lee, and I'm here with my colleague Kanupriya from the CIBC International Student Pay, or ISP team. First of all, everyone, congratulations on getting accepted to such a wonderful university. Kanupriya was just like you. She did her master's at York University as an international student. Her and I are here today to talk about making payments to York University. So if you go to the next slide, CIBC International Student Pay is the easiest and most convenient way to pay your tuition and any fees you have directly to York University in your local currency. We offer very competitive foreign exchange rates exclusively to York University students, so your money goes a longer way in paying Canadian dollars to York. We've been partnered with York University for several years for payments and have a lot of payment methods to make your experience easier, including bank wires, debit and credit cards, direct debit like ACH, and digital wallets like Alipay, WeChat, and GeoSwift. And lastly, we offer end-to-end support to students and the school to make your payment journey seamless. We provide payment status updates and the reminders for your tracking. We offer 24/7 support via our help desk, so you can reach us over email or phone to get your support anytime. And if you could go to the second slide, please. To make a payment, it's super easy. You go to York University's payment page where you'll find the CIBC International Student Pay option, and you click on it to get redirected to our secure payment portal, which is shown in the second step on the screen. You input your payment details, including your country of payment, payment amount, and payer details, and you're good to go. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask Kanupriya during the Q&A session, which we will be staying on for. And if you have any questions after the session or throughout your payment journey, I would like to remind you that we have our 24/7 support via email or phone. To the York University team, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know a lot of students, again, have questions about paying their tuition, so I really hope that I think this presentation was really helpful. So now we're going to move on to the Q&A section, and just to remind you again, you can ask all your questions in the Q&A chat. Thank you to both the presenters. So we have first a question here for Gilbert that is asking, how and when will I get my letter of introduction?
So that's a great question. One thing I wanted to keep in mind is that the processing time can vary based on the country in which you are applying for, right? So the last time I checked, it's taking averagely about 10 weeks to process study permit application, depending on when you submitted it. So you just have to be a little bit patient. And once your study permit has been approved, you're going to receive an letter of introduction, and then they'll request for either your passport to give you your TRV or either if you are from a visa exempt country, you're going to get the ETA. So I can't really give you a straightforward answer because I don't know what country in which you applied for. Applied from, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you for answering, Gilbert. And then we have another question here for you again that says, I already got the letter of introduction and the visa on my passport, so I get the study permit after I arrive in Canada. Is that right? I just wanted to double check that.
That's an easy question. That's a yes. So once you get to the point of entry, that's when your study permit will be issued to you.
Amazing. And we have another question here that says, I didn't get the part about do you intend to take or seek employment while in Canada? What should we say?
So that's okay. So as a student, you are allowed to work off campus and on campus, right? So 100%, that's okay to say, right? You can always answer the question. You always have to answer them truthfully, right? Are you planning to seek employment in Canada? Said if you are eligible, you plan to seek employment during the stipulated regulations of your study permit. That's perfectly fine to say yes. Okay.
Perfect. And we have another question here that says, I'm applying with a passport that will expire in 2027. What can I do to renew the student permit?
Okay, so that's not a problem. Once you arrive in Canada at the point of entry, your study permit is only going to be issued up to the expiration date of your passport. So before your study permit expires, I want you to come see us 3 months before that study permit expires. But 6 months before your passport expires, you need to consult with your embassy or your consulate to start the process of renewing your passport, because we can't extend your passport, your study permit if your passport has expired. So start working on extending your passport 6 months prior to it being expired, and 3 months before your study permit expires, come see us and walk you through the process of getting that study permit extended.
Another question that we have here is saying, what are the maximum number of credits a student should have in a whole year?
So if we are looking at the whole year, we are talking about fall semester and we are talking about winter semester, right? So as I mentioned before, you need 9 credits for the fall, you need 9 credits for the winter, right? So we look at semester per semester basis. So you can add a 9 and a 9, and that will be the duration for the whole year. We don't usually count the summer semester. Summer semester is optional. You can decide to take courses. You can decide not to take courses, but it's considered a scheduled break. So you don't have to take 9 credits during the summer term, but you can decide to take 9 credits, which will make you full-time.
Perfect. And these are all great questions, just encouraging everyone to keep asking your questions. Another question that we have here for you, Gilbert, is what is the medical document required during immigration?
Okay, so typically, and depending on your country and the country that in which that you're applying from, right? So there are certain countries that you'll be required to submit a medical report. So you always want to check if you've already done your application, or they've asked you to submit one. So medicals are usually valid for 1 year, and it has to be valid at the time of entry into Canada, right? So typically, if you plan to stay in Canada for more than 6 months, or you plan to do certain jobs in certain occupations. So for example, if you applied for a co-op, right, and the co-op internship is in a healthcare setting, it's in a clinical laboratory, it's in anything to do with medical related, you need medicals, right? If you don't plan to, then sometimes you might be exempt from having medicals. So just keep that in mind. That should have been part of your study permit application either way, if you are required to submit medicals.
Thank you, Gilbert. And the next few questions that I have will be for the CIBC team. And then we'll get back to more immigration-related questions. So a question here we have is, can an international student open an account at CIBC as soon as he arrives at Canada? And what documents are required to open a student account?
That's a great question, Nika. Thank you. And I'm happy to see that students are thinking ahead for when they come to Canada and how to set up their financial success with picking a bank. So you can go to CIBC or you can go to any other bank that you want to have an account with. And the documents that you would need as an international student is your study permit. You would need a piece of ID, so that would likely be a passport, and a letter of offer for your school. So with the study permit and your passport, you should be able to open a checking or a savings account, as well as apply for a credit card.
Thank you. And just as a reminder to everyone, quickly, just to let you know that we will have our service fair at orientation day, and banks are there for you to open your account. So thank you for your question. Another question we have for the CIBC team is, in my country, we don't have any of those type of payment methods. Is it possible to pay right when we get to Canada and open a bank account?
So that's a good question, and I'd be interested to know which country that is. I believe it was Mohammed. So for you to pay a fee or tuition to York University from your home country, every payment method is supported via CIBC. So for a lot of the countries, you will likely pay via bank wires, right? So the process that you have to pay via bank wire to York University would be, you submit your transaction on the CIBC portal, you'll get an instruction sheet, you go with the instruction sheet to your local bank, and they'll be able to create a wire with all the information that's needed there. Now, in terms of opening a bank account, when you come here, you can arrive here and you can ask your parents to send a bank wire directly to your account if you need funding for your personal expenses. So two things here. If you're paying to York University, it's directly through the payment options on your York University's payment pages. If you're getting funds for your own personal spend, then that can be a direct wire from your parents to you when you open an account here. I hope that answers your question, but if you have any follow-up questions on that, you can post in the chat.
Thank you so much. And another question that we have for you is, in terms of paying fees with CIBC, what should we do if there's a limit on the amount? For example, a 1 million cap on card payments. If we face issues, what should we do?
So that's a good question as well. And some credit cards might have caps, right? So depending on how your account is set up with your credit card company or your credit card, the bank that issued the credit card, you might have caps. With CIBC, however, you're able to submit multiple transactions. So if your transaction limit for your credit card per transaction is, say, $1 million, like you said in the chat, you can submit multiple transactions. You are allowed to submit multiple transactions at the same time. And if you have any issues in that, you can reach out to studenthelp@cibc.com, but we should be able to guide you further from there.
Thank you so much. And just a reminder, everyone, that as mentioned earlier, CIBC does have the 24/7 support that will be able to help you as well. Now we are back to immigration questions. So I'll have Gilbert to answer this one. The student said, I am from India and I have applied for a study permit on July 12th, did my medical in advance and had my biometrics on the 16th of July, but I haven't yet received my visa. Is it something I should look on right now?
Okay, that's a great question, and it's good that you did all those things prior to submitting your study permit application. Right now, the processing time for applications done in India is 4 weeks, right? This was updated as of July 30th, so yesterday, 2024. If it has passed the 4 weeks processing timeline, then I'll suggest you do a web form inquiry, and also there's an information tracker. I'll put the links in the chat for you too as well. ICC application tracker, where you can track the status of your application. So you can utilize those two as well. And also something for you to keep in mind is that, you know, sometimes depending on the volume of applications, it can take longer than processing. So just be a little bit patient. I know September is just around the corner. So and I think you can defer up to, and don't quote me on that, up to the second week of September. So just double check. If you still haven't received your study permit, you should defer to the next intake. And then that way you still have a place for your studies and things like that. So, but right now, just be a little bit patient. You can do a web form to find out if your processing has gone more than 4 weeks, do a web form, find out what the delay is, and IRCC will tell you. Okay, so I'll put the tracker in the sheet for you too as well.
Perfect. Another question that we have here says, I have been given 3 years instead of 4 because the duration of my visa is 4 years because of the expiry date on my passport. Can I apply for an extension, or can my dependents I came with also apply for an extension?
Yes, you can. So what I'll suggest is don't apply for the extension outside of Canada. Come inside Canada, and closer to the 3 months before the expiration, don't do it now. You have 3 years, to go. So 3 months before the expiration date of either your dependent or your study permit, we're gonna apply for an extension, right? So again, as I mentioned, IRCC wouldn't give you past the expiration date of your passport. So if your passport is expiring soon, you need to extend that first before we can do a study permit extension.
Perfect. These are all really good questions, encouraging everyone to keep asking your questions. Another question we have says, I took 2 6-credit courses for the year-long term, and 1 3-credit course for the fall term, and 1 6-credit course for winter. So now am I considered as a full-time student?
You really want me to do the math? Okay. All right, so 6 credits for the fall, and 6 credits for a year. So that means 3 will go to the fall and 3 will go to the winter. And then you're already taking 3 courses for the fall and 6 courses for the winter. So that means you're short 3 credits for the fall. You need 1 more course for the fall, because for the winter, you already have 6 credits and you're taking 1 year long course. So 3 will go to the winter, which will make you full-time, and 3 will go to the fall. So you're short 3 more credits. So you need 1 more course for the fall.
Perfect. Another question we have here says, how do I know if I'll be eligible for work at the port of entry if I get my permit after the questions with the officer? Or is it that after expressing a desire to work, they will include the work permit?
No, you shouldn't express a desire to work. As a student, if you are in a full-time program, you have work eligibility. So the officer would indicate the work authorization on the bottom of your study permit. May accept employment on or off campus, right? If meeting the eligibility criteria. Eligibility criteria means that you're enrolled full-time in the fall, full-time in the winter, you can work full-time. So you just need to check that those conditions are listed on the study permit before you walk out of them. That's all you need to check.
Perfect. Another question here says, do we have online classes waiting to receive our visa?
I would disencourage you to take online classes, especially if your visa has not been approved. Your study permit has not been approved. Your letter of introduction has not been approved. Do not take online classes. And the reason why I'm saying this is it's not going to count towards your eligibility for PGWP. So PGWP is the postgraduate work permit that I talked about during my webinar. So any courses that you take that you haven't been authorized to take, and authorization means you have an approval of a study permit. You don't have it yet. So any course you take, it's not going to count towards PGWP. So I would disencourage you from doing so. Wait, once you've received your study permit approval, your letter of introduction, you can do that, right? The other thing you need to understand is that any course you take online outside of Canada, it's not going to count also towards PGWP. It's like the whole point is, yes, I want to get an education, which is awesome. The second point is, what is the added benefit after I conclude my education? You'll be eligible for a work permit. And a lot of you are interested in that. Some of you are not. So if you are, don't do it.
Amazing. So we have another student here asking, I have an expired medical date on my LOI, but my letter of introductory is valid. Do I need to have another medical before I arrive at the port of entry?
So typically it's good to have a valid medical. So if you can get it done before you get to the point of entry, because they might ask you if you have a valid medical, right? Remember, medicals are only valid for 1 year, right? So if I had let's say 3 months validity left on my medicals and I'm traveling, that's perfectly fine. But you don't want to go with an expired medical. You have to make sure all your documents are still valid when you get to that point of entry. So yes, I'll suggest you get that renewed if you can.
Another student here is saying that I deferred from the winter term to the fall term. Do I need any special document to show the border officer?
Okay, so if you deferred from the winter to the fall, you should have received an updated letter of acceptance. And I'm hoping that you submitted that to IRCC to add to your application to let them know that you've deferred and your admission has been changed to the fall term. If you did all of that, then you should have that letter with you and should be part of your documentation when you arrive at the point of entry.
Another question that we have here, it says, also there is a new application status tracker. I don't know what it is. I just use my GC key to see my application status. Should I also use the new application status tracker?
Yes, you can. So typically I put the link already in the chat. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but yes, you can create an account. It's a separate tracking tool. You can log into your ICC portal and see, what the status of your application is. Usually on the ICC portal, it's very generic, but on the tracker tool, you can see at what point your application is. So I encourage you to create an account, sign in, and see where your application is at.
Amazing. Another student here is saying, what type of questions are asked at the port of entry for an IVRT? I also wanted to know if an IVRT is eligible for a work permit at the port of entry or not.
That's a great question. I wish Don was here, but I'll try and answer that question. So for IVRT, the process is a little bit different because you are coming here on PhD reasons, and sometimes depending on the country in which you're coming from, you're either going to need a work permit or a visitor's record where they're going to indicate if you have authorization to work or not. So for the person that posed that question, I don't want to mislead you, but I'll put the IVRT email in the chat. We have our colleague who is an expert on everything IVRT. Don, you'll be able to address that question for you in case I was not able to do justice to that. So I'll put that in the chat.
Perfect. Another question we have says, just to confirm that the study permit doc and TRV will only be given to us at the airport in Canada after the entry assessment.
So you should already have your letter of introduction. You should already have your TRV or your ETA. The study permit is what is issued at the point of entry. So that document that I showed you, that paper, that it's going to be printed at a point of entry. Once all examinations have been concluded and you've met all the eligibility requirements, that study permit is going to be issued to you at the point of entry. That's the only place. Once you're inside Canada, and let's say your study permit is about to expire and you need to extend it, that's when they're going to mail it to you at your Canadian address. It's not going to be sent to a foreign address. So make sure you update your address with IRCC once you arrive in Canada. So on your portal or when you're making an application, make sure you give your Canadian address because that's where your new study permit will be mailed to you. There will be no need for you to go to a point of entry at that point.
Thank you. Another question from a student saying, I have a TA as part of my funding package for my PhD. Should this be considered as employment? Should I mention that to the officer?
That's perfectly fine. So usually, again, if you're a TA and your job is on campus, there's no restrictions to how many hours you can work as a TA on campus, right? If the job is outside of campus, then that's when those restrictions fall in place, right? So as I mentioned, as a study permit holder, you do have work authorization. So if I'm a TA on campus, I shouldn't be worried about how many hours I can work on campus. But if I'm choosing to work off campus, then there's restrictions. But I also want to add that you are allowed to have both employment on campus and off campus, right? So I can have a job on campus and I can also have a job off campus. But what I need to keep in mind is that off campus, there's restrictions of how many hours I can work. On campus, there's no restrictions. So I can do my 24 hours a week off campus starting in September, and I can do unlimited hours on campus. And I hope that answers that question.
Perfect. We have another student saying, I already received a passport request on July 23rd, and I will be submitting my passport tomorrow. When can I expect to receive the LOI?
So you should have received the LOA already, right? So if ICC requests your passport, then that means you've been approved in principle for your study permit, right? The passport is for them to put the counterfoil, the TRV, the visa. It's for them to put it inside your passport. That's why they request it, right? But the letter of introduction, you should have received that through your GCK or through your ICC portal. Should have received your application has been approved in principle. We are requesting, and then a passport request letter will be sent in addition to that. So log into your ICC portal. You should see a PDF that you can download to show that your study permit has been approved, which is the LOI.
Amazing. Another question. My study permit got approved, but I haven't received my port of entry letter yet. It's been 5 days since I got the approval and received my stamped passport. How do I go about it?
Okay, so the same thing the same thing applies to you too as well. Once your study permit application has been approved, there should be an approval letter in principle, which is your port of entry or letter of introduction letter. It should be on your account. So log in into your GCK. So if you have an agent who's doing the application for you, they have to log in and forward that letter to you. The same thing, if you have your own login credentials, log in and it should be there because you should have received notification. Your application has been approved. You scroll down, there should be documents on the bottom of your ICC page once you've logged in and for you to be able to download those approval letters. And then there's also instructions on where to send your passport. You should have received a letter for that too as well. So there should be at least 2 letters in your application portal for you to access.
Perfect. I sent the updated letter of acceptance by raising a web form. Is that okay?
That's perfectly fine. That's awesome. That's exactly what you needed to do. So once you've deferred and you've received the new updated letter of acceptance, you do a web form. It's going to be added to your application so that IRCC knows that, you know, you're not studying in the winter, you're now studying in the fall. So you did all the right things.
Okay, another question. When I get asked questions by CBSA, do I have to mention that I would like to work part-time jobs if I want to get that working permit under the conditions in my study permit paper?
Yeah, it's not something I encourage you to do, right? What I'm saying you should do, okay, is once you've received your study permit on the conditions there, just do a quick glance. Check if the work authorization is written there. Do you have, it's going to say you may accept employment on or off campus. Just check. If it's not there, then raise that question to the officer and say, oh, I see that the work authorization is not there. Is it possible to amend the study permit to include that? That's when you should have that conversation. If it's already there, then there's no need to bring up that question. But if it's not there, that's when you should be having those conversations. Don't have it, upfront. Do it after the fact.
Okay, perfect. Another question here says, how do you get approval for the optional engineering co-op?
Okay, so co-op is technically first-year students are able to do co-op in their second year, right? So once you arrive to York University and you're acclimatized and everything is done, you have to go to your faculty or your department and tell them, you want to do co-op. And once the department, let's say Lasan, so engineering, so you go to Lasan faculty and tell them you want to do co-op, they'll approve you for co-op, and then they'll give you a co-op approval letter. then you have to do an application to apply for co-op. The application for co-op is free. You don't have to pay anything. It's just the processing time is a little bit longer right now. So come see us at York, 200 York Lanes, and then we'll show you how to do a co-op application. So once you've spoken to your department, that will be the first step, get that approval. And once you've received the approval, come speak to us.
Perfect. Another question we have here says about the bank statement that I need to show to the officer, what month and date should be stated on the paper?
That's a great question. So typically you're supposed to demonstrate 4 to 6 months bank statement, right? So depending on when you're traveling, so I'll just print out the last 4 months, 4 to 6 months bank statement. Again, you need to demonstrate that you have enough funds to support yourself in Canada, right? So accommodation, 20,635. That's how much the proof of funds is, including tuition. Right? So you need to demonstrate if you've already paid your tuition, you have a receipt of your tuition receipt, right? If you've already paid for your accommodation, you have a copy of the receipt too as well. If those amounts is not in your bank account because you've already remitted those funds to the respective institutions, have a printout of those receipts to demonstrate those funds have already been paid. If you've not paid them, have those funds in your bank account. So to reflect that you can afford to support yourself in Canada. Okay, so yeah, that's what I'll advise.
Okay, and another bank related question that we have here says roughly how many different bank statements should be printed?
Well, I'll leave that up to you. I don't know how many different banks you have, but you know, if you have funds in all those accounts and you want to demonstrate that to the immigration officer, then print them all out. If it has no, you know, reference to your education in Canada, then there's no relevancy in having those documents printed, right? Only the accounts that shows proof of funds and how you're going to support yourself in Canada.
Perfect. And a follow-up to another question that was asked says, my study permit has been approved and received and stamped. I have not received the POE letter yet. I did log into the IRCC, but it doesn't show any new documents. Is it because I have a visitor visa as well for Canada?
Okay, so it depends, right? So when you say your visa has been approved, and your passport, you received your stamped passport, I'm guessing that's for the V1 or S1 visa that you received. But if your study permit application was approved, there has to be a letter indicating that application was approved. That application which was approved is your IO letter of introduction, is your port of entry letter. So you're going to receive a letter saying your study permit has been approved. That is your port of entry letter. Because how do you know your study permit application was approved? It wouldn't just say it in a portal that application was approved. It will also say, this is a letter attached saying your study permit was approved. And that is AKA your port of entry letter or your letter of introduction.
Perfect. Another question, should we create a new application status tracker account by principal applicant or sponsor or else with representative or designated individual?
Principal applicant. Unless you have a representative that has access to your account, then that's a different, but you're not a representative. So, and you're not a designated individual. So a designated individual is someone you've authorized to have access to your application on your behalf. But you, as a study permit holder, are the principal applicant. So when you're creating an account, you have to look at it from that sense, right? Are you the principal applicant? Then click that option.
Okay, we have another question. Will CBSA ask questions about myself and my program, or will they only ask about, or will they also ask about Canada, such as laws and rules?
No, they wouldn't go to that extent, but just prepared for any questions CBSA would ask, but they wouldn't ask you, who is the prime minister, or, what are the EPA regulations and laws. They wouldn't ask you all of that. It's not relevant in this case, but you need to understand the conditions of a student and being compliant with the conditions of your student status, right? So you just need to understand the basics, but they wouldn't dive into the laws, but just be prepared for any questions.
Perfect. Do I still need bank statements if I pay my tuition fee in full?
Yes, you do, because you still need to demonstrate living expenses, accommodation. You need to demonstrate 20,635. So 100% always have your bank statement printed, or digitized, whichever option.
Okay, perfect. That is the end of our Q&A session. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your questions. These were amazing questions. If there was something that didn't get answered, please feel free to use our event calendar to book a one-on-one session or any drop-in sessions to keep asking more questions. And thank you again to the CIBC team as well as Gilbert for answering and just sharing all the information. Now we'll quickly go through our upcoming events and webinars. So if you are an incoming student and you're looking just to get answers to your questions, you have tons of students at York. If you want to connect with students and really get to know other people, then we urge you to join our Slack channel. It is for our international students just wanting to make friends before coming on campus, and the link is placed in the chat, or you could scan the QR code. So as we are coming to the end of our pre-arrival webinar series, we have our virtual Q&A for new and international students. If you are looking to get last-minute questions answered that you didn't get to ask today or in any other webinar, then we really, really urge you to attend the virtual Q&A sessions. We have 2 dates, which is August 7th and August 14th, that you're able to join. If you want to know things about housing, immigration, any of those questions about York and about your life here in Canada, then you may join the Q&A and ask your questions. And for those of you who have been a part of the Global Peer Program, I want to say thank you so much. We're coming to the end of this portion of the program as well. So we urge you to join our last drop-in, which is our August drop-in. The Global Peer Program is really a mentorship program for you to get to know another international student here at York, serving as another student here at York that is serving as your mentor. You get to connect, ask questions, you get to meet other international students as well, and get to spend one-on-one time. And you may register to the link placed in the chat. And this is our event calendar. If you need to make any, if you want to register for any of our events, or you need to make any appointment with our immigration advisors or attend our drop-in, you would scan this QR code or click the link in the chat and be able to get access to our calendar to register. And then finally, we ask you to follow us on all our social media platforms, just so you could keep extra updated with York International and everything that is happening. And just before, I just wanted to let everyone know that we do have our SIN clinics that are coming up. So when you attend orientation, which I hope everyone already registered for orientation, you will get to sign up for our SIN clinics and get your SIN number that Gilbert spoke about earlier. So thank you once again to our presenters and to our attendees for all your questions, all the information. I'll just quickly check. We have no more questions. So I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.